So welcome to WTF Stories and Advice. I'm Caroline Cranshaw. And today I am very honored to be interviewing a man I met on Facebook through a business group I belong to. And he is a author, a playwright, an activist. And I was just so actually blown away by the responses he was giving people in this Facebook group who were, for a better word, ignorant, and really put them in their place and did it in a way that didn't shame anyone, it's just amazing. So welcome, Ken. How are you?
Caroline.
Ken Harge. Sorry, did I not? Oh, shit. Welcome, Ken Harge. I'm so honored to have you on the podcast today.
I'm glad to be here.
So, with the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a movement that is close to my heart and one I want to support in any way I can, how are you feeling about what's going on in America and the world at the moment?
Well, I am mortified. I'm hurt to my heart with seeing what is happening to so many Black men that are being killed by police, being killed by civilians with not nearly enough urgency as far as justice. It's heartbreaking, overwhelming.
And as a Black man in America, I'm assuming you have white friends.
I do.
Discussing it with them. How are they about it? Like, are they supportive of the movement as well, and how you feel about it?
I have white friends that are awesome, that are very supportive. I've gotten a lot of unexpected support from Facebook white friends. Mm-hmm. And I have white friends that, friends is even a funny word, they're family. And I met this Italian family probably 25 years ago. I met the woman who is my age at a club, and we started talking and hitting it off pretty good. And we actually started dating for a little while. It didn't last long. However, we remained friends. And one day I needed my taxes done. And she said, "Oh, my sister does taxes." So I met her sister. And then we still talked, and her brother was involved in a network marketing company and said, "Oh, why don't you come check it out?" I came and checked it out, and I met her brother. Being in the space of coming and going at their house a lot, I met her mother and her father. Holiday times were coming, and they asked, "What are you doing for Thanksgiving?" And I was a bachelor. I said, "Nothing." So they're like, "Oh, come on over." So here goes the Black guy in an old Italian home with all the Italian relatives, and here goes a Black guy here. Mm-hmm. And it was awkward at first, but they took a liking to me. I took a liking to them. Thanksgiving led to Christmas, led to going to their house for cookouts and whatnot, and the extended family taking me in. Got to the point where we became like family. The mother and father would call me son. Many years later, when they passed away, I was pallbearer at both the mother and father's funeral. Mm-hmm. And I stood in line with the siblings in the reception line. I was part of the family, and they would simply introduce me as their brother Ken. That's it.
Mm. So very close.
Very, very, very close. Mm. And so with that closeness, however, there are times when they weren't as sensitive to racial issues as I would have hoped. And then more recently, talking about this whole Black Lives Matter movement, even before the George Floyd thing, I had a talk with my friend who's the one who brought me into this family. And She's a woman who brought herself up by the bootstraps. She struggled a lot as a young single mother, worked hard, eventually became a successful realtor, put her daughter through college, who is a successful RN nurse now. And so she knows what struggle is. And so for her to hear things like white privilege is a hot button for her. She thinks like, I don't have any white privilege. I struggle just like Black people. And she would say things like, I don't know why you all would just get over it, which is so hurtful. And we're to the point now where even though I love her, I feel like I can't talk to her about this stuff because I fear that she might say something that can't be unsaid and might just drive us apart. And so I've gotten a little bit of perspective on how it is some white people shun the idea of white privilege.
Yeah, I've just been losing my mind on Facebook and posting all kinds of stuff, and probably harsher than I should be, because I think that just because you don't believe white privilege is real doesn't mean it isn't. And with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think what I always am getting is all this, all lives matter, and how can you say this? And it's not that all lives don't matter. It's just that we have to protect the lives that are in peril.
Right.
And white privilege, just because you don't believe it exists, doesn't mean it doesn't. And I think it's like,
right.
I mean, I grew up struggling. I grew up with a single mother who was on welfare, had no money at all, was a shit of a kid at school, so went to all kinds of like schools for juvenile delinquents. And so I struggled. I had learning disabilities, but it wasn't because of the color of my skin.
Right.
And I think that, with my own experience with when I would be with white friends or my own with the police, it was, treated with respect. They were kind. They would let me get off things all the time. And then when I was with Black friends, it was a complete different story until I would call them out on it, and then and I was lucky enough my best friend's father was a homicide detective. So every year I went to the police picnic and I met all the police, and I was very careful to kind of foster these kind of not relationships, but, I know who you are and you know who I am and have this connection. So I was able to use that to kind of call people out and be like, hey, my Uncle Mike, and I remember you from the police picnic. And suddenly their attitude would completely change.
Right. So
it's a hard one I just can't understand how people can't see that it's real. As a Black man, you're 2.7 times more likely to be killed. If you're an unarmed Black man, you're 5 times more likely to be killed by the police.
And speaking on white privilege, yes, it is. One of the definitions, you kind of touched on it with your own experience, but I heard a white woman who explained white privilege in a way that I think puts a really sharp point on it. She said it's not that you don't struggle if you're a white person. Plenty of white people struggle, but their struggle and their challenges aren't based on the color of their skin, and that is white privilege. And I think it puts it in a way that can maybe be received a little easier than some other ways you might explain white privilege.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the movie The 13th recently.
Yes,
have you seen
I have.
that? Yeah,
twice.
And just to see the history of it, I highly, highly recommend that movie. It's on Netflix, The 13th, and they really talk about the history of the prison system and a little bit about slavery. And just the opening scene to it is Obama talking about how America is 5% of the worldwide population, but we have 25% of the people that are incarcerated. Right. And they talked about when the Civil War ended and 4 million slaves were freed, they really needed people to do the work. And so they started arresting Black people just for anything, for loitering, for vagrancy, for anything. And then they would give them years and years of hard labor for this.
Right.
And so they became enslaved in another way. And I think that people need to educate themselves about what's going wrong. And for you, what do you think people need to do to change this? What do you think white people need to do? What do you think Black people need to do?
I think that we need white folks to be willing to listen. As simple as that is, it's critically important. So often, even my friends, the Italian family, I've spoken about, they're resistant to even hearing about racism because I think somehow they feel like they're implicated just by bringing it up. And I sense that a lot of white folks are sensitive for that reason. It's like they take these protests about racism personally, like we're talking directly to you, which may not necessarily be the case. Obviously, the protest is against people who are guilty of racism, but it doesn't apply to all white people. And so listening, I think, is extremely important. And I think that with that, there's a lot of healing that can happen. A lot of the angst from Black folk, I think, comes from, why won't you freaking listen to what I'm saying to you? Just that.
Yeah.
And sometimes getting it off your chest is a lot. And so that is one thing for sure, is be willing to listen. I don't know that there's a lot of magic bullets, except I think listening is one magic bullet that is a lot more profound than it may sound on the surface.
Yeah.
And I think, too, being willing to speak up when they observe racism happening, say something. Now, the time for silence has gone. We need for white folks to stand up and say something. We've been seeing a lot of that in protests. I know of protests right here around in Connecticut where there have been protests with almost all white people, if not all white people, which is very heartening because the unity that in numbers that comes from that will ultimately, I think, have a big impact.
Absolutely. I think it's not enough to not be a racist. You have to be anti-racist.
Yes.
You have to speak up and say something. And it's something I've been taught to do my whole entire life, is to always say something, always call people out. Yes. It's caused me a lot of kind of issues. And it's like the Nazis. And I think that's like for my like my grandfathers both fought in World War II. And it wasn't, that got so out of control because people didn't say something. They like allowed it to go by. And I think that in this day and age with Trump as a president, and I don't want to go all anti-Trump, but it's given people permission to be openly racist, yes. To feel like it's okay, yes. To judge people, to make these horrible comments, to keep people down. And the people that benefit from keeping people of other races down are white people.
Yes.
It's like, I think that's part of the discomfort.
Yeah.
Is they don't want to acknowledge that they are benefiting from the system.
Right. One of the other things that I've thought about and I've heard a couple of people speak to is well-meaning white people may look at the fact that laws have been passed, civil rights laws have been passed, voting rights laws have been passed. For a time, affirmative action was very prevalent, not so much now. But they look at these things and then wonder, like, what is your problem? I don't see. Like, what else can we do? And the problem with that, I've heard a couple of analogies. One is let's say a race on a track where white people have been on the track for 400 years, benefiting from everything. They're running around the track, sponsors earning money, running around their 400 years worth of running ahead of black folks. And then laws change that allow black people to get on the track and run. And they say, okay, we're all set. We're like, hold up. No, we're not. No, we're not. You have a 400-year jump on us. We are not all set. And I think part of the discomfort in white people even if they can't quite articulate it, is to have a feeling or an instinct that really, in order to balance the scales, going to have to give up something. And not necessarily money like reparations. I think that's an idea that, even though it's just on its face, I think it'd be impossible to make that happen. It's just such an intractable situation. I think it's impossible to happen. However, something has to happen. And the only way for equity and balance is that white folks have to give up something. I don't even know if I know exactly what that is, but I think that part of the resistance is that a lot of people know that, well, I work for what I have. I'm not giving up anything. And so any talk about moving forward kind of gets shut down. They're like, well, we changed the laws. And what else do you want? And it's not enough. It's not enough.
No. So I guess that is the question. How? Yeah, I think it is. It's rising people up. I think things are changing. NASCAR not having the Confederate flag is huge.
Big thing.
People are going, oh, well, that's our history. And it's like, well, yeah, so was the Nazis' swastika. Was their history? And it's hard to know how to change it. But I think it is not just in America, but worldwide. And it's interesting as an American living in New Zealand now, is that when I came here, I was horrified about how acceptable it was to be openly racist. And what's interesting is they're not really racist against Black people. They if you're African American in New Zealand, you normally have it pretty good. Like they really think you're cool and awesome over here. But if you're Asian, if you're Indian, if you're Maori, which is the indigenous people of New Zealand, or Pacific Islander, you get judged quite openly and held back. And it's things we have to call each other out on it. And I think, and it comes down to policy.
Yes.
It has to be government policy as well that has to change. And I think especially in America, there's not just affirmative action, but I think with this current government is they're repealing all kinds of discriminatory protections that have been put in place, like by Obama.
I think a couple other things that I've heard bantered about is, like I said, reparations is a non-starter. That's never going to happen. However, there can be things like giving Black people low interest mortgages so that there's a greater representation of home ownership in the Black community, low interest or no interest small business loans, things that give us access to financial power in the country and financial stability can help to start balancing the scales without going into the pockets of white people.
That's a good idea.
Oh, those are a couple of things, like giving ways to give access to financial security and ultimately financial power.
I think that's a good idea. And also, I think with schools, people talk about defunding the police, and it's like, well, they've defunded everything else, haven't they?
Right.
This current government. So I think it's making sure that every child has access to good education.
Right.
And that's another thing. Absolutely is education. But
I just saw a documentary last night on Netflix. I love documentaries. It was called Teach Us All. And it started out in Little Rock, Arkansas, when they desegregated the schools back in the late 40s, I believe, and kind of went through the whole span of time up until now. And there's still people Black folk that went to that school as kids, Little Rock High School, and look back and see like there's not much change 60 years later. And they went to different parts of the country. New York is horrendous with the disparity in education from low-income kids to more affluent kids. And education absolutely is something that has to change. And the reason it hasn't is because it hasn't been important to the people empowered to change it. And so the same kind of nonsense that has persisted for 60 years continues, where inner city schools are a joke, where even here in Waterbury, some of the public schools, I've heard teacher friends of mine say that they're sharing books, and it's bonkers to me. And so there has to be an app. Yes,
the kids
are sharing books in a public school.
Wow.
And so we have to have politicians in place who are determined and who will accept nothing less than every single child in this country has to get a top flight education, period. And just do what's necessary to make that happen. And it hasn't happened because there's not a will in our leaders to make it happen. And so we have to get rid of those leaders until we get the ones who care about it.
And I think that it comes down to voting as well. If everyone voted,
yes,
I think that our government would look very different.
Yes.
Because I don't think a lot of the people who are in positions of power within the government represent the average American. Everybody vote.
There's been a greater representation of women who are starting to run for office. There's more people of color, and that has to happen more. And it has to be a process. A lot of times people who've been disenfranchised feel like, why bother? Because nothing's ever going to change. And that's exactly what people in power want us to think. They want us to just go off. We have this handled, and we can't fall for that. We have to know that in time, won't happen by next week, but in time, things can change if we persist and keep at it and keep on getting more people in government. Even local government is even more, you can see more immediate change than national government. But we need both. Police officers, we need more police officers who are minorities, all of that stuff. We need to be represented more.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think can happen with the police? Like how can we change that so it's not something that's just become normal? And there seems to be not a lot of, retribution, like how many people are killed and just nothing is done. Like they seem to kind of protect each other. So
I think it's going to have to be governmental changes. We have to start getting together and demanding the changes we want. I've heard talk about a couple of bills for police reform that would be mandated federally and that would kind of trickle down to localities. But to my mind, one of the things we need is that if a police officer, and I say this as a person who has a few really good friends who are police officers, I know for a fact that not all police officers are bad, but we need a law. I think it needs to be a federal law where if a police officer shoots an unarmed person, they get arrested immediately. Just as a protocol, right off the bat, you are going to jail and you're going to get processed through the system. There's not going to be these hearings in this arbitration and the union stepping in and all this nonsense. The same kind of laws that apply to civilians need to apply to police. They live here like we live here. They should be forced to follow the same kind of laws. And there's something called qualified immunity. Essentially, what it means is that police officers, because of their position, get a free pass a lot of times. There's a presumption that, well, if they did it, they probably had a good reason to do it. And so it has to be an extremely egregious situation for them to face the heat of actions that they take. I think that qualified immunity needs to be erased from the books and that they have to be held to account the same way civilians are. If I shoot somebody who's unarmed and it's not clear as day, my life was under direct threat, I am going to jail. And then you get a lawyer, you go to court, you work it out. That's when the investigation happens. This investigating stuff before you even arrest the person is nonsense. Nonsense. They have to get arrested immediately.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, like with body cams, and they think that's making a difference. But what I'm finding or hearing about is that a lot of people cops are turning them off before certain things. And I think that, like, if you're doing that, that's premeditation. That is like, they obviously know they're about to do something wrong. So I think it's like they shouldn't have the option to take that off unless they're going to the bathroom or something. I guess you wouldn't want that recorded. So for you, like, you also are a playwright and an author.
I am. Yes. I've been an avid writer for quite a while. I started off as a musician. So I've always been good with creativity and writing lyrics, and I've been always very opinionated. And so years ago, I started a blog back when, remember Blogger?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I started a blog on that, and that grew into me doing a local TV show on cable access. I don't know if they have that there, but
yeah, we do. Yeah,
cable companies are mandated by law to provide a free channel for people to do their thing. So I thought, oh, I'll do my thing, and I had a talk show, talked a lot about political stuff, social issues, and every week I actually wrote out a full script for the show. And that helped me to hone my writing skills. And eventually I wrote a couple of newspaper articles. And I decided to write a play. I've been always one of those kind of guys that I get a bright idea that some people might think is like, what? I'm like, yep, I'm going to write a play. And not just a play, a one-man play. And most famous actors have never done a one-man play. It's the hardest thing you can do. So I wrote the script. It was an hour and a half long. I had to memorize that script. And
wow.
Some friends of mine read it and said, oh, I think this might be a good book. And I started writing the book. And previous to that, I had actually given the script to a local theater director who said, oh, bring it down. I brought it down the next day to have her check it out. I didn't hear from her for months and months, so I kept on with the book. I was almost finished with the book. I heard from her a year later, said that she finally got around to the script, loved it, and asked if I'd like to come down and talk to her about potentially doing it, performing the play at the theater. And so I started working with this woman who was a veteran theater director, kind of got a master's class on how to express thoughts in theater versus how you do it in a book. It's the same subject matter, but how you express it is very different. She showed me those subtleties. And so after working with her on the play and working on the novel, which is based on my life largely, I finished the book, and now it's out on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and everything. And I'm even working on a second book now.
Cool. And the title is?
The title of the first book is You Are Here for Something Great. And it's funny with that, as I was writing the book, I didn't have a title. And I was thinking, and then it dawned on me, I've had this habit that when I get a bright idea, I'll register the domain. And so I have about 30 domain names registered. And so I started looking on my GoDaddy account, and it hit me like a lightning bolt. You're here for something great. That's the title. And so I had it, I used it, and it's worked out great.
Cool. That's awesome.
And it focuses, the idea behind that is my belief that everyone, literally every person alive, is here for something great. And we oftentimes minimize that. A lot of people can't even hold that thought in their head. They're so intimidated by it. But part of the issue is that we think of greatness as being a great athlete or an actor or a millionaire business person. But there are a gazillion ways to be great. And our challenge, our mission, should we decide to accept it, is to find our specific lane And when you find that and put effort into it, then you can realize your greatness. And that's essentially what the book is about.
Wow. I'll have to read it. I agree. I think we're all here for something great. And I think some people can't get their heads around it or don't really believe in that because of blocking beliefs or whatever. But
right.
I think some people are here for something great in their death.
Yeah.
Like George Floyd.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. And what gets me is people like Candace Owens.
Oh my God.
Who I've yet to see a Black person post Candace Owens videos on anything. It's always white people that are posting her. And I remember first seeing a video of hers, and she was talking about being forced to wear a mask and how she thought this was ridiculous. And I kind of liked her. I thought, well, she had thoughts kind of like I did at first, right? But we weren't talking about anything to do with race at all, right? Or she wasn't. And I thought, oh, she's interesting, and I'll kind of check her out. And then something else was talking about how it's just bullshit that Black lives are under duress or police brutality. And that was all just more about the way people behave. And I went, oh, no.
Right.
She's a white supremacist.
I do.
Don't you think?
I would say she's a racist for sure. And I had seen a couple of small snippets of her. I could never take more than a minute or so before I get grossed out by her. But recently on our business group online on Facebook, after seeing her video talking about George Floyd and saying that Black people always celebrate the lowest common denominator, and that George Floyd was high and he was a criminal. And I was appalled at what does that matter? What does that matter? The sentence for being high is not to get executed on the street. And so I put a comment on the Facebook group that simply said, Candace Owens equals garbage. And I immediately started getting likes, ding, ding, like I could literally see them clicking, ding, 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 ding. And then I saw a couple of people like, nope, you can't say that. It's unacceptable. And I'm a kind of guy like between you and I and your million listeners, I'm a sensitive guy. In fact, I also say I've learned only recently, like, sensitivity is actually my superpower. I didn't understand it at first. Kind of like Clark Kent didn't understand his flying at first. You have to figure out how to use your superpower. So I started getting bothered by the negative commentary, and it turned into a huge discussion where so many people were agreeing with me. Most of the people, maybe 3/4, maybe even more, were agreeing, but some weren't. And so I thought about it for a while, and I decided to write another post because I'm a very introspective kind of guy, and I want to use my voice in the most powerful, useful way I can. And it kind of occurred to me that being a man of words as a writer, that maybe saying Candace Owens is garbage was clumsy because it allowed some people to be distracted from what the issue really was. Candace Owens is not important. Black Lives Matter is important. And how I phrased that post gave people who were so inclined to see past the real issue to this little tangential thing that really had no meaning. And so I was able to humble myself, and in doing so, to reach even more people to see, like, wow, I can see what you're saying now on the Black Lives Matter. And I think that's something that is on an ongoing basis is going to be important. Like, there is plenty of reason to be outraged. But if you're going to go up and smack the shit out of somebody, they're probably not going to care what you have to say. They're going to care that you smack the shit out of them. So smacking the shit out of them might not be the best approach. And I learned that. And so now my determination is to be more artful, And I used the analogy. I said that when I should have been playing 3D chess, I played checkers. And I can't afford to do that. I can't afford to squander my voice in that way. And so my intention is to be a lot more artful and thoughtful when I commit something to writing, especially. Like when you're talking, you can clean it up. But when you write something and send it out, and it's something I've learned a long time ago, and I almost never falter with it, but I did that time, is when you write something, it has to speak for you when you're not there to defend it or explain it.
Yeah.
And so it was a learning lesson. And I think that I'll be a better spokesman because of it and be able to use my voice a lot more effectively because of it.
Yeah, I read that exchange and I had liked your comment because I am not a Candice Owen fan, and that has nothing to do with the color of her skin. It is completely to do with, the things she says. And I think she just emboldens and empowers white people to stay in their thinking, right? But yeah, I remember reading that exchange, and you came back and you're very humble and you apologized and you said, right, I didn't get that right, and this is how I should have said it. And that for me, I was like, right, I need to interview that guy because yeah, you showed sensitivity, you showed that ability to kind of learn from your mistakes. And I think that's what we all need to do. And I think that's what white people need to do is like, I know for me, I was really afraid to, I like I told you before, I recorded a podcast talking about Black Lives Matter with my co-host and we're two white people, and he's Scottish, who lives in New Zealand. Thought, right, I don't want to get this wrong. And I need to talk to someone who's experiencing that and who can and talk about it from their own experience and not just two white people discussing it. I mean, I think we need to keep talking about it, but I really actually respected you for the way you handled that situation.
Thank you.
Because we all say shit that sometimes is blah. Like, I've posted stuff about Trump that I've then gotten massacred for.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take it back because that's how I feel. But I realized telling people they're fucking racist doesn't really change the fact that they're racist. They're not going to hear me.
No, it doesn't. That's right.
We have to learn to say things in a way that people can hear us. And I think that it's something that I'm struggling or trying to improve in the way I do it.
This topic is such a powder keg. It's filled with emotion. It's filled with terror. It's filled with heartbreak. It's filled with, on the other side, white people being offended and worried, like, well, what's going to happen to us? And I worked all my life and this and that. And it's a really super, super sensitive subject. And there can be an inclination for us to talk past each other and not hear each other. And we have to be willing to hear each other. If we can start from that place, I think we have a chance to start turning things around. I am an optimist, and I believe in the power of, I always want to call to mind the Luther Vandross song, I believe in the power of love. And it sounds corny, but I do. And I believe in the human spirit, and I believe that God created us as free-thinking people so that we could think freely and express ourselves, and that through all of this, there's things to learn. I think and I don't know that it'll happen in my lifetime, but eventually I think we'll get through it, and that we'll learn from the George Floyds and the Trayvon Martins and the Eric Gardners and the Candace Owens. We'll figure out, like, yeah, that stuff, it didn't work, and this is how it didn't work. And then we learn to start coming back to a place where things start to work. We learn to moderate and modulate our actions, and eventually I think we can get there. But it starts from listening and hearing each other and being willing to being willing to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people, what I'm also seeing a lot of people posting is, or white people, it's like, oh, well, it's okay to protest, but people are rioting and they're making kind of horrible comments about that. And I think that, like if a woman says that to me personally, I'm like, well, as a woman, do you enjoy having a bank account and a job and being able to own property and not having to be the property of a man? That's because women protested and they rioted. They rioted like crazy. Same for gay rights. And I don't think that the people that are protesting are the same people that are rioting. I think those are two different groups. And I think that there's stuff that's being generated, or, I was hearing this story about like in LA, how they were doing a peaceful protest. It was like families with kids and their dogs. And then suddenly there was this intersection where this old cop car turns up. And it's like from the 90s. It's obviously not in use, but they light it on fire. Yeah. And so then you see on the news that there's the protesters and there's a cop car burning. I think they've done it in several cities. Right. Or where they're going, where people are going to protest, there's pallets of bricks like being turned up and spray cans. And someone or some group is trying to incite violence for whatever reason. And I don't think it's the people on the Black Lives Matter part of that movement. I think it's something else.
I think that talking about rioting as the first thing that some white people are offended by is the same thing as what happened in that thread in the group of my Candace Owen comment, when the first thing, every single one except for one woman that complained about me saying it, the first thing they're concerned about is that I said Candace Owens is garbage. Let's forget about the fact that Black men are being assassinated on the streets. Let's forget about the institutionalized racism. I want to talk about what you said about Candace freaking Owens. That's a problem. It's the same problem that allows some white people to first talk about rioting and looting without talking about the tragedies that are happening in our streets nearly every day. And so that is another thing that I think has to stop. I wrote a post once that said, I have a bright idea to stop rioting and looting. Stop killing Black men in the streets. It'll stop just like that. We got it wrong. We got it reversed.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, why are people so angry? Why are people so disenfranchised? And I think that with COVID as well, like with my own experience of being in New Zealand, like we had a lockdown very quickly, but everyone was paid by the government. Like I was paid by the government to stay home. I have free medical care. But talking to my friends in the States is they weren't able to work. A lot of people, unless you're an essential worker, and you're not paid. You don't get any money. So you lock people in their homes for months on end. You give them no money. And most people are 2 weeks away from being out on the street, basically. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And what do you think they're going to do? Their people are pissed off and they're hungry and they need money and they need support. And meanwhile, the American government spends all this money on the military, more than the next 23 countries. I think it may be even the next 25 countries. And 23 of those are allies. That just makes no sense. What about the people? Yep. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think we have to keep talking about it. We have to vote. We have to get the people that don't understand or who are systematically blocking any rights and policies for the people out of there.
That's an essential thing.
I think gerrymandering, when I tell New Zealanders about gerrymandering, they think they just can't even understand.
Right.
What? Yeah, it's beyond their comprehension.
Yeah.
So, or the fact that you can go bankrupt if you get sick and you don't have medical insurance. America is so broken in so many ways, but it's such a great country in so many ways that I think people are waking up and they're not going to take it anymore.
There are good things for sure. I saw a clip which I believe was from a movie. And this guy was on stage. It was like a debate. And he was challenging the idea that America's the greatest country in the world. He just ran down a laundry list of all the areas where we are not number one. And we've kind of gotten conditioned in this country to say America is great. It's like a slogan. And when we look at it, I mean, there's certain things like our freedom is exceptional for sure. Our freedom to speak, freedom of expression, religion, those things, maybe those are number one in the world. But in a lot of other areas, and to me, I think that in a country where a police officer can literally feel comfortable with his hand in his pocket, chilling, while a man is dying underneath his knee, America's not great when that can happen. It's not. America's not great when so many of our children can't get a decent education, and so they drop out of school. And then there's just so many repercussions downstream. Then they wind up a lot higher chance of going to prison. And then the cost of that, when, as you mentioned, healthcare, the fact that you have to almost be rich if you get sick. God forbid you really get sick. There's a lot of ways America is not great. And I'm not willing to say America is great until it's actually freaking great.
And that's what I find ironic is this whole campaign of Make America Great Again.
No.
And
Nope.
has it become greater? No. But I think that's, as an American, it's drilled into you. I know for me, every day I pledge allegiance to the flag, and this is the greatest country on earth. And I really believed that until I traveled outside of America. And once I did and saw the news that just didn't have this news of glorifying America, but actually talked about real problems going on in the world and in America, it was like, oh, wait a minute. I know exactly what clip you're talking about. It is genius. What's the guy? Jeff Daniels is the actor. I try to remember. It's a news show or Newsroom, or I can't remember. I'll find the clip and I'll put a link in the notes below so you can see it, because it just blows. Yeah, because she's like something about why. Can you tell us why America is the greatest? And he lists off how the only thing we're number one in is the highest rate of incarcerated people and and people being murdered, and gun violence or something like that. But he's like, the rest of it, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. It was just so powerful. We need to wake up and stop spending so much money on the military. I respect you, but we don't need to spend $1 billion on some type of invisible plane, or just money that could be going to feed people, to give them medical care. And as in New Zealand, everyone has free medical care. If you don't have enough money to eat, the government gives you money. There's so many, and there's a lot of things broken here too. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But it's just it's a human right. So people don't worry if they get sick. They know they're going to get medical care, and we pay the same taxes as Americans. People go, oh no, you must pay 50% taxes and all of this. We don't. We actually pay a similar amount of taxes to Americans. Yeah. So, and what we get for that is much greater.
Yeah, we got work to do.
Yes. And so I think we need to get more people in government who represent those beliefs, who aren't just about big business, who aren't going to just push through the priorities of the corporations that gave them money, that put them there. And I remember someone talking about how they should make all members of Congress but that they should wear jackets with all their sponsors on it, like race car drivers. Yeah. And I thought, that is genius. If you could see exactly.
They'd have to wear big clothes.
They would. Yeah, and it has to be, the more money they got from them, the bigger the tag had to be. And I thought, that is so good. You could actually see who they're representing.
Yeah, so transparency in every way, to see what they're up to, what they're doing, and where their interests really lie, and so that we can hold them accountable.
What do you think of Joe Biden?
I think he's good. No one's perfect, but I think he's good. I was a little bit troubled with the woman that said she was attacked by him. And then her story started changing a bit. But I like him. I like him. You'd be hard-pressed, in my mind, to find a legitimate candidate for president that would be anywhere near as bad as Donald Trump. I think you'd have to just have some writers come up with a bizarre character to do that bad again. So comparatively, I love Joe Biden.
Yeah, exactly. And faced with the alternative. I just wish Obama could come back, personally. I think he was the greatest president we ever had. And I just went, I know. She would be so good. But she doesn't want it. She's smart. She's
nope.
You can't blame her. No. But yeah, what gets me is when people go on about how Obama's the worst and Trump is the best. And I'm just like, oh my, how? What did he do that was bad? I cannot understand.
Yeah. He cut taxes, which is an easy thing to do. But the problem is that we're going to pay for that. It's caused a gigantic hole in the deficit, and it hasn't come home to roost yet, but it's going to come home to roost. So that's like an easy thing to do. Cut taxes. Then it was for mostly the rich people, and so they're going to take care of him.
Exactly.
And then he spent money on military. For a lot of people, that's a big thing. And between those two things, he cut. I don't believe I'm here talking about things Trump did, but I don't necessarily agree with him. But he cut a lot of regulations, which actually hurt a lot of small businesses and environmental things and whatnot. But he's an indecent man. I've always known him to be indecent for long before he ever got into politics. I've seen him, and I saw him at a motivational event, a Tony Robbins event, believe it or not. And I was like, why is this guy here? It was bizarre. Why? Because he's such he's gross. So there.
He's not my cup of tea. And I probably get an email once a week, maybe a bit less now, with people telling me they liked my podcast until they heard what I said about Trump. Yeah. And I'm like, well, if you're a Trump lover, I don't really give a fuck if you like my podcast or not. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to exclude anybody, but I think when you say you support Trump, then you're looking the other way with a lot of things he does. He's openly racist. He has done horrible things to women. He openly, publicly says horrible things about women, disabled people. Everything you can imagine that's offensive, and people still think he's good. So it's it's not that I think you're stupid. You must be much worse than that, right? Then if by supporting him, you're racist and you're a misogynist and you're all these other things as well. So
that's another thing with my Italian family that I think I got a little insight on. And I have other friends that are Trump supporters who are not racist. They might not be where I like them to be, but I think part of what the Trump thing is, this is my theory on Trump. I think, I'll go back to my book, You Are Here for Something Great. That includes Trump. I think the thing he is great at is he's a hustler. He's good at seeing where's the crease in this thing that I can get into that crease and exploit that. I don't even know, honestly, and a lot of my black friends would want to kick my ass for saying this. I don't know, honestly, if he's a real racist. I think he's an opportunist. And he saw an opportunity for white people who felt left out of the Obama thing. Black people supported Obama come hell or freaking high water. I was one of them who didn't, actually. I mostly supported him. I loved him. But when he did something I didn't like, I'd speak out. I caught a lot of arrows for that. Most black people loved him to death, and liberal white folks loved him to death. And so there was a segment of the population who felt left out. Comes a guy who's a hustler. He's like, I know how I could get them. And so he starts appealing to them. I almost wouldn't be surprised if he makes up a lot of shit just to appeal to them so that they support him. I think he's like a huckster.
Oh, he does. I think he's a pathological
Absolutely,
liar.
He's that too.
I can't remember which newspaper it was, but yeah, they fact check him constantly. And I mean, this was years ago, and they talked about he was up to like 10,000 public lies or something like that. It's just constant, but people he's saying what they want to hear. And so they agree with it. And they feel like it seems to be kind of white, poor or middle class people that think he really has their interest at heart. No, he does not.
Yep,
he has the wealthy's interest at heart. He is not, he's never been one of us, one of them or one of us, who grew up with nothing. No,
never.
So yeah, someone who's been, okay. I'm gonna stop.
I know.
Because otherwise I'm just going to rant.
You know what's funny about that? I had a 30-day challenge group. It's called the 30-Day Goal Crush. Today was the 30th day. One of my goals was not to write anything negative about Trump for 30 days. I succeeded at that. I'm still going to say I succeeded because I'm not writing what I'm saying to you. So I have to get through today, and then we'll see. I might have to let loose on him a little bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't last
that was hard.
very long
That's hard.
at all.
Very hard.
I bet. Because I think we have to speak out of it. But what I find so interesting is how many people support him and think he's really good. I find it with clients here all the time. Oh, don't you just love Trump? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And let me tell you all the reasons why I do not love Trump. And I have to really kind of watch it so I don't offend people. But yeah, I just pray that he gets out of office. And I just think that everyone needs to vote. I vote from here. I think every expat, if you're listening, you need to vote. Your vote makes a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, well, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure
for coming on and sharing your perspective. It's been really helpful. Is there anything else you want to kind of say or that you think people should know?
I think just tying it all up in a nice, neat package is we need for our white brothers and sisters to be willing to listen. Absolutely. Absolutely. Just relax. We're not attacking you. If you're a decent person, we're not attacking you. Relax. You're okay. Relax. And we don't want to take anything from you.
Yeah.
We want a fair shot at the American dream. We want to not wonder if I get pulled over for a speeding ticket, am I going to wind up on CNN dead?
Yeah.
We want our kids to have great education and not be limited because of where they live or the income of their family. And we need to vote our interest in every single person who wants for things to change and for there to be equity between the races. We need to vote for people who will swear. To me, it has to be a litmus test. Are you in favor of Black Lives Matter? If you're not, then we can't vote for you.
I agree. Well, thank you so much. And where can they reach you? Ken, is there a website or?
I can be reached on Facebook, Ken Harge. I am on Instagram, the same thing at Ken Harge. I have a website, kenharge.com. That's kind of like my ground zero. And the book is available, You Are Here for Something Great, at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, most of the online book retailers. And that's that. I'm up to a lot of things.
Wow. I just really appreciate you coming on. So that's us for today. If you have a comment or a review, please share this with your friends or give us a review, and that helps other people find us. And Black Lives Matter, people, just so you know, and just everyone needs to support that. And it doesn't mean other lives don't. It just means that Black Lives matter just as much. And it's something very, very important.
That's right.